So we are going to start a practice, a training. And so in this retreat we will be practicing few types of meditation, few techniques of meditation. But our overall goal would be experiencing the true happiness. Whenever we hear the word happiness, usually we think about happy moments, occasions that we feel elated or excited. But the Buddha has taught us there are different levels of happiness, and we are only dealing with very primary or very ordinary levels of happiness. But Buddha has given us a clear path that we can actually move into higher forms of happiness. And so what we try to do within these 3 days is to train our mind to experience that deeper level of happiness that comes from tranquility and also that comes from insight. When it comes to meditation, people think that it's kind of dry and very boring kind of practice. But if you really think about how the kind of change the Buddha introduced, the whole system of meditation, is that he is the first ascetic, if you want to say, first meditation teacher in the whole, let's say, ancient system of meditation that incorporated joyful states, serene, joyful states to meditation. And that was actually the breakthrough he did in the whole system of meditation. If you read some of the sutta, particularly the Maha Satchaka Sutta and the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, both are in the Middle Length discourses, where Buddha described his own journey of meditation. And he described after practicing all the ascetic practices, what he felt. And then how he changed his method, what's the kind of insight he had. After experiencing so much of pain and suffering and thinking that, making such and giving such extreme form of fasting, extreme form of physical pain, that we can develop some kind of different states of the mind. And after failing that, and Buddha was, of course, that time the ascetic Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, Bodhisattva, was contemplating the mind. And then he asked this question: why I should be afraid of joy? Why should I be afraid of happiness? Because in the ascetic practices, the method of self-mortification, whatever form of happiness, whatever form of joy is considered a hindrance, considered something that people will attach and that will hinder the spiritual progress. So whenever they experience some kind of joy, some kind of happiness, quickly they removed it and went to more extreme form of ascetic practices. Then the Bodhisattva, after practicing so many ascetic practices, was asking this question: why should I be afraid of joy? Why should I be afraid of happiness, of piti and sukha? And then he made an important change of the whole meditation system. He made a decision: as long as the joy and happiness is not connected to sensual pleasures, is not connected to unwholesome states of the mind, and I should not be afraid of them. Instead, I should cultivate them. Then he focused on the mental state we call piti, which is usually translated to English as a spiritual joy, and sukha, which is a deep physical ease, comfort that we get as a result of calming of the mind. And then he focused on developing these two qualities, piti and sukha, which actually help him, of course, to remove the hindrances. Of course, when you remove the 5 hindrances, you experience these qualities. So Buddha made a decision not to be afraid of happiness and joy as long as they are not connected to sensual pleasures and unwholesome states of the mind. And instead he developed them. That is how Buddha was able to discover the path to enlightenment. So why I want to say it is that happiness and joy is very much an integral part of meditation. But this kind of happiness and joy we are talking about are not simply momentary sensations, but they are more like deeper level of mind. And true happiness is not momentary. They are not simply fleeting moments, but it's more like a state of the mind, a more enduring state of the mind that we can develop as a result of freeing our mind from defiling thoughts, and as a result of finding a place to settle our mind. So that is what we are going to do in our meditation. And of course, that kind of joy comes as a result of appeasement of the mind, as a result of calming of the mind. So we usually associate happiness to excitement, happiness to happening and excitement and elation. Of course, Buddha actually talk about that kind of happiness. He called it samisa sukha, the happiness of the flesh, happiness related to sensual pleasures. But they did not deny that there is no happiness at all there. But for the Buddha, the kind of happiness that we get from sensual pleasures is very minor, very little. Very little. And sometimes are also not wholesome and skillful. And there's also danger that we will be attached to those sensual pleasures and give up our all value of human life. So it's not really against sensual pleasures, but it's showing the limitations of those pleasures, and sometimes danger of those pleasures. And then encourage as human beings, we can go beyond that. And we have all rights to experience deeper level of happiness and joy. Not simply limit ourselves to this very simple, primary kind of happiness, but go beyond that happiness. And then he introduced other forms of happiness which are not necessarily related to sensual pleasures, but related to other qualities that we develop in our mind. At least we can simply divide. The Buddha has given so many names and so many different grades of happiness, but for our purpose, we can actually divide happiness to 4 types in terms of the grades. The most primary, ordinary level of happiness is happiness of sensual pleasures that we usually experience when we have a pleasant sensation with visual object, with nice sound, piece of music, and nice tactile sensation, and pleasant sensations. That is primary level of happiness, physical sensation. And then the other level of happiness is related to purity of our body and speech. That comes from sila. That comes from following moral principles. Like when we commit ourselves to live by moral precepts, actually we are giving. It's also part of generosity. When you follow precepts, we are sending a message to everybody that you should not fear me. I mean, you don't need to fear me because I am following this precept. I'm not going to steal your things. I'm not going to cheat you. I'm not going to harm you. And it's a form of giving, dana. Buddha has clearly said it. So we are telling all living beings in the world that you don't need to fear me. And if we can live such a life, that's a different form of happiness that we develop more like satisfaction, confidence, and more enduring state of accomplishment. And that is different from fleeting moments of pleasures and happiness. So that's the other level of happiness that we enjoy as a result of living a moral life, which also includes generosity. Of course, we give fearlessness to others when we follow precepts. And of course, we can also give other things, share other things. When we share, when you give, when you help somebody, when you give what you have, when you can relieve suffering from other person by simply sharing what you have, or even sharing your time and sharing your knowledge, that is also a higher level of happiness. It's much, much higher than pleasant sensations, pleasurable sensations. It's more enduring. Pleasurable sensations are nice, but we cannot maintain them. And sometimes we get fed up with them, right? How long you can eat, how long we can keep eating chocolates, for example. Of course, you can eat in few days, but if you are given a whole day, you can eat as many chocolates as you can. Can we keep eating for an hour or two? We get bored, no matter how pleasant they are. Then we need a break. And also we need some kind of effort to have those forms of happiness. And then later we get tired of them because it requires an effort. But the happiness that we get through the following moral precepts and being generous, they are connected. Because even following moral precepts is also a form of giving fearlessness to others. You become a harmless person to all beings. And then we also do active giving. And that brings us a deeper level of happiness, much higher than pleasurable sensations. And of course, that's not all. And the third level of happiness is called Niramisa Sukha, the happiness that is not related to sensual pleasures, which is actually experienced as a result of tranquil mind, settled mind. Not exciting, agitating mind, settled mind. When our mind is settled, calm and tranquil, we experience a higher level of relaxation and a higher level of mental upliftment, mental joy. So we call piti and sukha. That is much, much higher than other forms of happiness. It is a kind of happiness that we experience as a result of appeasement of the mind, settlement of the mind, settling of the mind. And we used to get happiness as a result of agitation and activity, but when we settle our mind, when we bring our mind to a peaceful, calm level, and the whole ease is a kind of ease that we experience throughout our body, and it's kind of ease is more like release of a burden, releasing of burden, releasing of tiredness, and that kind of happiness we can experience, and that is through in meditation, through calming of the mind, settling of the mind, more related to jhanic experience. We can have momentary, more primary level of such happiness. We can have more endured and more advanced level of that happiness. The fourth happiness is related to more of knowing, insight and wisdom. And that is happiness of knowing, or happiness of insightful knowledge. That happiness comes when we really see for ourselves a deep truth of reality. As a result of calming of our mind can be penetrative enough to actually see what is happening right here. Most of the time we cannot see what is happening right here, what is happening within us, and therefore also we don't have a clear idea of what is happening out there. But as a result of meditation, we can actually develop deep insights. We can just experience for ourselves the changing phenomena, the changing sensory experiences. So it's particularly the kind of happiness that we experience as a result of directly seeing the three characteristics: the impermanence, and it's very interesting. We call it dukkha. It's a suffering, and not suitable for enduring happiness. And when you really experience, when you really realize the suffering, you experience happiness. That is interesting, right? When you truly realize the suffering, and what is left there is happiness. And when we really see for ourselves, directly experience the impermanence and vulnerability of our worldly things to generate suffering, when you realize that. And then, of course, when you realize the non-self nature, that we cannot claim any ownership to anything. We cannot claim any ownership to anything. We cannot be an owner of anything. You should feel like, disappointed, right? I cannot own anything. We feel like disappointed. But actually, when you experience in proper training, proper framework, we experience much release. And no need to claim ownership. I don't need to worry about. And then we release that burden of ownership. And that's form of deep happiness. I'm talking about vipassana happiness. Vipassana happiness, the highest level of happiness. And that is why the Buddha called the Nibbana is Paramang Sukhang. Paramang Sukhang. The highest form of happiness is Nibbana. Is the happiness, but highest form of happiness. So happiness is very much part of the Buddhist practice. The whole aim of Buddhist path is to release from suffering. What is the release of suffering? Release from suffering. Can we give another name for relief from suffering or release from suffering? Can you give me another name for that? Release from suffering. Happiness. Release from suffering. Happiness is the absence of suffering. You don't look for like exciting other more thing. The very release of suffering very absence of suffering, very relief of suffering is the happiness. But it's more like enduring state. So the happiness is very much part of this practice, and it's also very integral part of meditation. That is the unique nature of Buddhist meditation, and that's what the Buddha actually introduced, this whole system of mental culture, incorporating peaceful, joyful, happy, serene states to this meditation, and encouraging us to develop such peaceful, joyful state as long as they are not related to sensual pleasures and not related to unwholesome states of the mind. Therefore, we have full right to experience joy and peace and happiness and deep levels of happiness in the meditation, and that's our goal in this retreat. To experience joy of serenity, joy of calm and settled mind, and once in a while, let's try at least in second, third days to also experience joy of insightful knowledge. Okay?